Hi guys, in this video we're going to have a look at loading and saving JSON data. So the app I'm going to use to demonstrate this is a small app which I used in the last video as well. It's basically a book club app where you have a list of books and the scores that they were given out of 10. We can add books in here. So if I just add a test book and click add book, now it's added that data to the table. But one of the problems is that the table isn't saved at the end of the program. So if I close the program now and then start it again, then that book has disappeared. So the way that I want to save the books is using JSON. I have all of the data that I want to save inside this class called myTableModel. At the moment, the data is being created in the constructor. I'm just adding some example books into the book list. So the first step is to add in a library which I can use to read and write JSON files. And the one I'm going to use is this one, JSON-simple, which is reasonably simple, as the name advertises. So I've already copied it into my project here. If you don't have it in your project, you can just drag and drop it over and choose copy so that the file is copied into your project. Once it's in your project, you need to right click on it, go to build path and choose add to build path so that it's available within the programs. Okay, so once you've added it to the build path, we can start using JSON-simple. And I'm going to start off by writing the save routine. So this is how I'm going to save data. Let's create a method for it. And I'm going to take path as a parameter to my save method so that I can specify where I want the file to be saved. So the first thing I need to do is to convert this data from objects, because each book is an object in Java. I want to convert that into JSON objects. So Java objects obviously exist within memory. JSON objects are things which I can write to disk. So I'm going to create a method here which returns a JSON object. And that JSON object is going to contain all of the data in the book. So I'll import JSON object, and that's being imported from JSON-simple. And then to create my JSON object, I just go JSON object JO equals new JSON object. And then jo.put. Now, Eclipse corrects things which it corrects things which are right to make them wrong, so that can be really annoying. Okay, now I'm going to put the data values into this JSON object. So first of all, the title, and the value for title will be whatever stored in that string title. And then secondly, I'm going to put the Eclipse is so annoying. I'm going to put the score, and that's going to be the value of that integer. Now you can only store basic data types like string and integer. If you want to store a more complicated data type like one of your own classes, you're going to have to write another toJSON object method which can convert your class into a JSON object. So now I'll return the JSON object that I created, and this just gives a simple way to convert a book into a JSON object. Now what I need to do is convert all of the books in my table model into JSON objects. So because this is an array list, right? This is basically a list of books in order. Then I can convert those into a JSON array. So the pattern here is kind of similar. I create a new JSON array, and I'll need to import that. And then for each book in my book list, I'm going to add that to the JSON array. Now I need to convert the book into a JSON object, so I'll call toJSON object to convert it into an object. Okay, now that converts the table to a JSON array, and the next step is to write that to the file path which is provided. So that's not too tricky because I can use the files.write method. To write to that path, and then I'm writing the now hold on, I need to convert the JSON array into JSON text first of all. So JSON text, JSON array, I think actually I do JSON serialize, that's it, JA. So this will take the JSON array that I created and convert it into some text. And then that text is what I'm actually going to write to the file. Okay, and when I write, obviously there could be a, oh, hold on. There we go. There could be a disk error, so I need to add in try and catch to handle if there's any kind of input-output error. So this should save my JSON data to a file. Now, I have to provide a path here. One thing that can be quite useful is to have a default path. And what I normally do is to read the system's home directory like this. So system.getProperty user.home will give you the location of the user's home directory. And then you can return paths.get the home directory, and then just put it inside the home directory. So for example, let's call this bookclub.json. That's going to create a file called bookclub.json inside the user's home directory. So then if I ask to save data and I don't provide a path where I want the data to be saved, then what I'm going to do is save it to the default path. And that will be in the user's home directory. So this should save the data off. Let's just test it out. So I'll go to Book Club, and then let's save the data every time I add a book. So I'll just put my table model dot save. Now each time I add a book, it should save that data. So let's just try running it. I'll create a new book, test book 1, give it a score of 3, add book. Okay, so it's added to the table and I haven't had an error, so that's hopeful. Let's go to my home folder. It is in there. So what did I save it as? Book club or book list? Bookclub.json. Okay, so this one. And then if I open it up, okay, and there's all of the data, including the test book that I added. So this is one of the good things about JSON, is that you can open it up, you can look at the data in a text editor and just check that everything is how you expect it to be. If it is, then of course that means that at least the saving part is working, and if something goes wrong, then it's in the loading part. So that all looks fine. Let's try and implement the loading now. So I'll go back to my table model, and then we're going to write something to load back in the data. And again, I'll take a path in. Now, I'm basically doing everything in reverse. So the first thing I've got to do is to read in the text from the file. So that will be files.read. That path. Thanks, Eclipse, for correcting me again. I think maybe I need read bytes. read all bytes. That seems to work. Okay, so string JSON text equals new string, and the string is going to contain all of the bytes that I read from that file. And of course I need to surround it with try and catch because there could be an error. Okay, now once I've read in the text, the next step, actually what I'm going to do is just move that JSON text out here so that I can access it a little bit later. So this part reads in the data from the JSON file as text, and then the next step is to convert the text into JSON objects. So to do that, I can write object JSON array. This is the JSON array that I saved earlier up here. So actually let's call it JA so that the names match, equals JSON.deserialize, and I'm going to give it the text that I've just loaded in. Now that could also cause an error, so again I have to surround with try and catch again. So there's a lot of rather verbose error handling here, but it can't be helped. And again I'm going to put that here so that I can use it later on. Okay, so we read in the text, and that could cause a disk error. Then we convert the text into JSON, and that could cause a format error if it's not in JSON format. Okay, now if I get this far, then I've read in some JSON and I've correctly interpreted that JSON and converted it to data. So now I just have to go through and read out all of the information and create books from that information. So the first thing I need to do is to go through each of the objects in the array. Now, I might be tempted to write something like this for object in JSON array, but the problem is that Java actually doesn't know that it is a JSON array at the moment because I've just called it an object. So if I write JSON array here, then now Java knows it's a JSON array, but I get an error here because Java's saying this isn't guaranteed to produce a JSON array. So I just have to basically it to be classified as a JSON array. This is what's called a cast. So I'm changing the type because this would normally return an object. I know that actually it's going to be a JSON array, so I write the name of the type in brackets to force it to change to that type. And if I try to coerce the type into something which actually isn't correct, then I'll get an error when running the program. But as long as this is a file which was saved by my save code up here, then this should work fine. Okay, so now I can go through each object in the JSON array, and of course each object is going to be one of the books that I saved from this book class. So I need to restore that book. What I tend to do in this kind of situation is to create a method called from_JSON object. This is going to take a JSON object and it's going to return a book with all of the data that was stored in that JSON object. So the JSON object in question is going to have a title. Now again, I'm using a cast here because I know that I'm going to get back a string. As long as it is a valid book, I'm going to get back a string for the title, and the score now the score will actually come out as a big int because this library, big decimal, because this library saves all numbers as big decimal, and a big decimal is basically just a number with arbitrary precision. If I want to convert it to an integer, then I use the int value method to change that into an integer. And I need to import big decimal. Okay, so now I've got a string and a score, and I return a book with that title and that score. Now, as it is, I would need to have a book in order to create a new book from a JSON object, right? Because this is a method inside the book class. So that would be a really awkward way to use it. I would have to create a book first in order to create other books. But what I can do is use the keyword static. And that means that instead of needing to create books in order to create more books, I can just create a book directly from the book class. Don't worry too much about the details because we haven't looked very much at static, but this is a particular case where it's very useful to create a method which is static so that we can create objects from a class without actually needing an instance of the class. So now I'll go back to my table model and I will convert the object into a JSON object first. Here's another cast to change that object into a JSON object, and I need to import JSON object. And then once I've got a JSON object, I can create a book from it. Like that. And then the last step is to add it to the list of books. So book list, add book. Okay, and that should load in all of the books from the file. Now, just like before, I'm going to create a load method, which will load the data from the default path so that I don't have to specify where I want the data loaded from each time. So let's go back to the main program. And then at the very start of the main program, I want to load in the data. So after I create my table model, my table model dot load should load in that data so that when I start the program, I'm going to have everything appearing in my table. Now, since I'm going to read in data from my table, I shouldn't need this data anymore. I can probably delete that, but for now, I'm just going to comment it out just in case something goes wrong and I need that. So let's run it. And interestingly, I have got the numbers, but I'm missing the titles. So perhaps I've done something wrong with the string. Let's have a look inside the file again. Okay, so inside the file, it still seems to look all right. I've got titles in there. Let's go back and see if I can spot why the titles aren't appearing correctly. So I'm reading the title out there, and it obviously cast a string correctly, and then I'm creating a new book. Let's try just printing out title and seeing if they appear correctly at this stage in the program. No, so all of the titles have been read in as null because I've put book instead of title. What an idiot. Okay, try again. There we go. That's it, really. I can type in a new title, test book 2. When I click add book, it's going to also save the file. So that JSON file should now be updated with the test book 2. And then when I start the program again, it's going to reload that file, and you can see that test book 2 has persisted across multiple invocations of the program. So that's a gobbledygook way of saying the file is saved, right? And if I run the program twice, then it doesn't forget about the books that I added the last time I ran the program. Okay, so guys, I hope that helps in loading and saving data with JSON. If there are any questions, then of course just let me know.